Welcome back. I'm glad you're still with me. This is our last lecture, and we're going to see the end of Egypt as a nation. But it'll be presided over by a fabulous woman, Cleopatra. Let me pick up where we left off last, with the good Ptolemies. Ptolemy I and II, they had founded the library at Alexandria. We have the lighthouse built. They're running Egypt like a business. They're doing fairly well. But that ends. The later Ptolemies really didn't take care of business. They were more interested in reaping the benefits of being king. They were given nicknames by the people that suggests things were drastically wrong. For example, one Ptolemy was called Physicon, fatty. He was so fat that he had to be helped up so he could walk. Right? Cleopatra, the last ruler of Egypt as a nation, her father was called Oletus, the flute player, because he was more interested in playing the flute than taking care of business. Now, Cleopatra is someone about whom there are all kinds of myths, and there's a good reason for it. History is written by the victors, and Cleopatra lost. So there's this image of Cleopatra as this femme fatale, luring good Romans to their death. Not true. Not true. She wasn't promiscuous. She wasn't this femme fatale. Right? But it's because the Romans defeated her and they wrote the history that we have this image of Cleopatra. Today, we're going to look at Cleopatra's life in 3 stages. The first stage is before she meets Caesar, as a young girl. Then, with Caesar. And the third stage is after Caesar, which is the same as with Mark Antony. Let's start with Cleopatra before Caesar as a girl. Her father, Ptolemy Auletus, the flute player, Ptolemy XII, had tremendous problems. People revolted against him. He had trouble staying in power, and he knew what he had to do. He went to Rome and asked Rome to keep him on the throne. He made a deal. He would bribe them. He would send them money. And they wouldn't get their money unless he stayed on the throne. So Rome kept Cleopatra's father on the throne. And Cleopatra saw this. You'll see. It plays an important part in her life. Now, as a young girl, we have certain incidents about Cleopatra. First, we know that she went with her father to the tomb of the Apis bull, which is called the Serapeum. It's at Saqqara. And let me describe the Apis bull to you. The Apis bull is a unique god in all of Egypt. As you know, the Egyptians were not reincarnationists. They didn't believe you're going to come back again. They were resurrectionists. They believed you were going to get up and go again. That's why they mummified. The closest I can come to an example of possible reincarnation belief is the Apis bull. There was only one Apis bull alive at any one time. It was believed that the Apis was born when lightning struck a cow and the cow became pregnant. So the Apis is part god, celestial, part terrestrial. When this Apis is born, it had special markings, and that's how they could find the Apis. It had wings on its back, it had a scarab, a beetle shape on its tongue, and its tail hairs were doubled. These were the signs of the Apis. When the Apis was born, it was pampered and treated as a god. It was kept in a temple, perfumed, fed, and when it died, it was mummified. The bull was buried in a tomb at Saqqara, an old kingdom cemetery, a revered cemetery, in a large tomb, of course. Now, when the Apis died, though, the search began for the next Apis. Sounds like reincarnation. They're looking for another bull with wings on its back, scarab on its tongue, double tail hairs. And when that Apis is found, it goes to the temple, is perfumed, taken care of, until it dies. Mummified, placed in the tomb. Over the centuries, the Serapeum, the burial place of the Apis bulls, became vast. Chamber after chamber was built. Stone sarcophagi. They were buried with jewels, these bulls. And it was a very, I guess it's mysterious place. When you go into the Serapeum, even today, it's very mysterious. It's a long cavern, rooms over here. Each one once had an Apis bull. Cleopatra was taken by her father to Saqqara to see the burial place of the Apis bull. They must have been burying a bull, and she was there for the services. Now, I believe that this is a turning point in Cleopatra's life. Cleopatra will become the only Ptolemy ever to speak Egyptian. The only one. The Greeks didn't care about the Egyptians. She's the only one who is going to try, well, she does, to speak Egyptian. Not only that, she will make a desperate attempt to resurrect the Egyptian religion, which is dying. And I think it's because as a kid, as a child, she goes to this tomb of the Apis bull, hears the priests chanting, sees the incense, and it makes an impression on her that will change her life. So we know she goes to the Apis bull tomb with her father. Now, her father dies, and he leaves a will. He actually leaves 2 copies of it. One in Alexandria, and the other is in Rome. Rome, because he knows if this will is going to be honored, the Romans are going to have to back it up. And he leaves as his successors actually, 2 of his children. His eldest daughter, Cleopatra. And there were 7 Cleopatras. The famous one is Cleopatra VII, our Cleopatra. She is going to be one of the rulers, and she is going to rule with her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII. So they are placed on the throne. Now, she hates Ptolemy, her younger brother. He's a brat. She just hates him. And Ptolemy isn't ruling for himself. Cleopatra is perhaps 17 years old. Ptolemy's younger. And there are 3 people who are put in charge of Ptolemy, in charge of calling the shots for him. There is a politician, a rhetorician, maybe somebody has to make the speeches, and a eunuch. Somebody has to keep the peace. The important one is the politician, Pothinus. He is plotting all the time. And he turns the people of Alexandria, who are mainly Greeks, against Cleopatra. He puts the seeds of doubt in their mind that Cleopatra is pro-Roman, that she favors the Romans and doesn't care about the Greeks. Now, there is a little bit of truth in this. Cleopatra is smart. You know, she spent her childhood in the library at Alexandria. She read the history of Egypt. It is known that Cleopatra spoke many languages. When her father greeted ambassadors from foreign countries, she was there listening, and eventually she was allowed to greet them in their own tongue. This is a very smart young lady. And she saw that her father stayed in power only because of Rome's might behind him. She knows she needs Rome. It's kind of like in business, when people use other people's money, she was going to use other people's army. She was going to use the Roman army as her own. So she is pro-Rome. And Pothinus is telling the Greeks, oh, she's pro-Roman, we're going to be in trouble. And he sets up a revolt against Cleopatra. Cleopatra flees the country. She knows she's about to be killed. She flees. But she is no ordinary woman. She's only 17 years old. But she doesn't just flee. She raises an army. Right? She raises an army. She's going to come back. Now, at this time with civil unrest in Egypt, Rome is concerned. Why do they care? They want the grain to keep coming out of Egypt. This is feeding Rome. Egypt was called the breadbasket of Rome. Rome wasn't growing enough for their army, and they're going to take it out of Egypt. So Julius Caesar is sent to Alexandria to straighten things out, to settle Rome, to settle Egypt so Rome can get their grain. Now, what does he do? right? He sets up in the palace at Alexandria. Cleopatra's out of the country, but she hears Caesar's there to settle the matter. She knows she has to get back to the palace. She knows that Pothinus is going to turn Caesar against her. And this is the famous scene. How does she get back to the palace? It's the famous scene in the movie, the Cleopatra movie with Elizabeth Taylor. And one of the things that amazes me when I teach Cleopatra in my classes at my university, the kids don't know about this movie. The famous Elizabeth Taylor Cleopatra film, they don't know it exists. I mean, it's a wonderful movie. And you have this great scene where Cleopatra is smuggled into the palace in a rug, right? And the rug is brought to Caesar. And he said, "What is this?" "It's a present." And then they roll out the rug, and there is Cleopatra. Now, what does Caesar make of this 17-year-old girl? First, Caesar is sophisticated. He's a military man, but he is educated. Speaks Greek. He could speak to her in Greek, right? She could probably speak to him in Latin. So they don't need a translator. And what they do later, they won't need a translator for. But she comes out of this rug, and Caesar has never seen a woman like this. Now understand, he's a womanizer. He's middle-aged, he's sophisticated. But he's never seen a woman like Cleopatra because Roman women stayed in the house. They were uneducated. They were supposed to be in the kitchen. And here is Cleopatra, speaks maybe 5, 6 languages, educated, powerful. She may be a kid, but he's never seen anything like her. He has to make a decision about who should rule. He has to settle things. You've got her younger brother and Pothinus, and you've got Cleopatra on the other side. He rules that they should rule together. His decision is, nope, we follow the will of her father, and they rule together. Pothinus doesn't like this. He's always plotting, and he's always trying to figure out who's going to win, and he wants to be on that side. So Pothinus starts a revolution against Caesar. Caesar only has a small army with him. Never thought there'd be problems. And Pothinus sort of stirs up revolt. There is a mini war called the Alexandrian War. It's not a big deal. And Pothinus loses, right? He loses. Caesar, of course, is ticked off. And Cleopatra is plotting. She has Caesar execute Pothinus. So he's killed. He's out of the way. And then her younger brother, Ptolemy, right, is drowned conveniently trying to escape. Cleopatra is on her own. She is ruler of Egypt. A teenager. What does she do? Well, I think she was rather cunning. She decides to take Caesar on a tour of Egypt. Smart move. Caesar, as I say, is sophisticated. He's been around. But he's never seen anything like Egypt. At this point in history, Rome is mainly mud brick. The Rome that tourists see, the Rome that, everybody loves now, was not yet built. This is a stone nation, a nation built in stone, and he is going to be impressed. And she says, let's go on a boat ride, and I'll show you some of the things. So she intends to impress Caesar, undoubtedly. They go on a boat, which is, it's a Greek word, the megathalos, the big boat, the megathalos, big boat. It was a fabulous boat, practically a houseboat. Now, what would Caesar have seen on this tour? Well, as they go south from Alexandria, they would have seen the pyramids. Caesar would never have seen that. The pyramids that were built by Sneferu. The Bent Pyramid, the Red Pyramid, the Great Pyramid at Giza. They might have gone to Saqqara, and maybe for the first time, Caesar would have seen a mummy, an Egyptian mummy. And he would have learned about immortality, how the Egyptians believed in a kind of immortality that I think Caesar may have found appealing. The idea that you can live forever if you're preserved properly. But then they continue their tour south. And they go all the way south, right? They're going all the way to Thebes, the religious capital, which was called Waset by the ancient Egyptians. And there he would have seen the obelisks erected by Hatshepsut at Karnak Temple. And then they continued even further south as far south as Aswan. You know, he would have even seen, I mean, all the people we've talked about, he would have seen their monuments. He would have seen Taharka's Hall of Pillars. I think he must have been blown away. Never saw anything like it. By the time they reach Aswan, Cleopatra is pregnant with Caesar's child. They stop at a place called Hermonthis, not far from Thebes, not far. And they agree that if the child is a boy, they will build what is called a mamisi, a birth house. It is a little shrine chapel to commemorate the birth of a god. Now, Cleopatra, the ruler of Egypt, is a goddess. So her child is going to be a god. And if it's a boy, they will build this birth house. Now, it is a boy. It is a boy, and they did build that birth house. And if you want to see Cleopatra's name, one of the few places you can see it, because the Romans destroyed her, is go to Hermonthis, and there is one block left of the temple that's upside down, but on it is a cartouche with Cleopatra's name, built for the boy who would be born. And she names him Caesarion, Little Caesar, right? Names him after Caesar. So Caesar has an heir, and he's a god. Now, Caesar has to go back to Rome. He's got to take care of business. But once he goes back to Rome, I think he's changed forever. I think he has been with a goddess. He would have been viewed as her consort, as her husband, by the Egyptians. There were no marriage ceremonies, as far as we know, in Egypt. There was no ceremony. When you simply lived together and you were husband and wife, but there was no real formal ceremony. So I think certainly the people of Egypt, seeing Cleopatra travel through Egypt with this man, would have taken him as her husband. Now, of course, Caesar has a wife in Rome, Calpurnia. And he returns to Rome. He returns to Rome. He has business. But he sends for Cleopatra and Caesarion. And Cleopatra and the boy go to Rome. Now, Rome is outraged. This is a Roman with a good Roman wife who is bringing an Egyptian and his child to Rome. And he sets Cleopatra up in one of his villas just outside of Rome. And then he makes it worse. He has a statue of Cleopatra dressed as the goddess Isis placed in a Roman temple. People don't know what to make of this. They just don't. I mean, I think the women would have been intrigued by Cleopatra. They've never seen anything like her. You know, they're probably interested in the makeup and all the people who are coming with her, her entourage, and they've never seen a boat like hers. I mean, it must have been fabulous. I mean, you could just hear all of Rome buzzing about her. And then he sets up this statue of her in a Roman temple. Now, more concerned than anyone is the Roman Senate. They are concerned that Caesar wants to rule Rome as a god. I mean, he's getting in his head. They're afraid that this woman, Cleopatra, is corrupting their good Roman leader. And they decide he has to be killed. Now, this is the famous Beware the Ides of March story. This is where Caesar is told by a soothsayer not to go to the Roman Senate on March 15th. Beware the Ides of March, that he would be killed. He goes anyway, and he is indeed stabbed to death by the Roman Senate. They literally all gang up on him, and they all stab him. Cleopatra is in a bind. She is in hostile territory, Rome, with a child, and she is widowed. Now, I think at this point, there is a very interesting parallel between Cleopatra's real life and an Egyptian myth. Let me say something about perhaps the most central myth in all of Egypt, Isis and Osiris. Now, according to the myth, Isis and Osiris are husband and wife, sister and brother. And they come down to Egypt to civilize Egypt. Now, what I mean by civilizing Egypt is they teach Egypt farming and cattle raising. So they're no longer hunter-gatherers. They are a civilization that is sedentary. And it goes very well. And from Egypt, all other civilization spreads. Typical myth, you're learning that Egypt is the most important place in the world, and everything comes out of Egypt. Eventually, Osiris is killed, murdered, by his brother, his evil brother, Seth. Right? But Osiris is resurrected by Isis, by magic. She resurrects him. Now, in the form of a bird, she hovers over Osiris. He resurrects, impregnates her, and she has a child, the god Horus. Osiris becomes the god of the dead because he's the first person to resurrect, and he goes to the west. Now, what we have here is Isis, a widow whose husband has been killed. She has an infant child whom she must protect. And there are trials and tribulations which Isis overcomes and protects Horus. This is exactly the situation Cleopatra's in. Exactly. She's got a child. Her husband has been murdered. She flees to Egypt. She flees. She must have thought, oh, I'm like Isis almost. She must have thought this. She stays there for several years. And then this is the end of the part of her life which is with Caesar. Then Antony enters her life. Now, Antony is a general. He's no Caesar. He's not cultured. He's rough around the edges. And he asks to meet Cleopatra. Why? He needs Cleopatra's support because there's civil unrest in Rome, and he's going to have to wind up fighting Octavian, perhaps. So he goes to see if Cleopatra will back his war. Cleopatra meets him at Tarsus, but she makes an incredible entrance. She has this boat that's fabulous. They've got gold dishes on the boat, solid gold dishes. And the oarsmen are dressed as gods in costumes. And she pulls in, right? And she invites Antony, who has never seen anything like this, to dinner. And this is the stuff of which legends are made. At this dinner, she has these big pearl earrings on. And according to the legend, I don't know if this actually happened or even if it's possible, she takes off one of these big pearls that everybody's looking at, and she drops it in her wine cup, which is vinegar, partly vinegar, and it dissolves, and she drinks it, right, just to show the pearls mean nothing to her. After the party, she gives away the gold dishes to the guests as party favors. Right? Oh, you like the furniture? Take that too. Antony is impressed. He goes back to Egypt with her. And they sort of hang out together, and that's the best term for it. It's not official government business, but they are hanging out together. They are drinking. He's rough at the edges. She can live that kind of life too. And she becomes pregnant. Now, remember, he's no Caesar. I think Caesar was the love of her life. I really do. Antony's no Caesar. And she has twins by Antony. Twins. Now, remember, she named the son of Caesar Caesarion. Well, she has a boy and a girl, but she doesn't name the boy Antony. She names the boy Alexander Helios, Alexander the Sun, named after Alexander the Great. She's looking back at her heritage. The girl is Cleopatra Selene, Cleopatra the Moon. So she has these two children. Antony has to go back to Rome, take care of business. And what does he do? He marries another woman. He marries Octavian's sister, Octavia. Political marriage. Makes sense. But Cleopatra must have been furious and deserted. I mean, she's a widow with 3 children, right? I mean, don't think of her as this poor, woman with 2 in diapers. She's queen of Egypt. She's doing all right. But she must have been furious. Anyway, later, several years later, Antony is about to fight his wars, and he needs Cleopatra. He needs the army to be sustained. And he sends a messenger to Cleopatra. He says, will you meet me? Now, this is the woman he's abandoned, right? She says yes. But remember, she is very, very smart. She is cool and calculating, and she agrees to meet Antony in Syria. They meet, but she arrives with an agreement already worked out in her head. It is the kind of agreement that any Hollywood lawyer would be proud of. She will help Antony, yeah, but he's got to make certain concessions, right? What concessions? First, they will be married, right? They will be married. But he's not going to rule Egypt. Caesarion is the ruler of Egypt. Also, in return for financing the war, Cleopatra is going to get Sinai, Judea, Cyprus, and Arabia. Right? Caesarion, he's going to rule Egypt. Antony agrees. He's stuck. He's got to do it. Right? So they agree. And during this period, she has another child. Names him not Antony, Ptolemy. Ptolemy. She knows that Antony isn't somebody you can really anchor yourself to. She needs him, he needs her, they're doing okay. So they agree to this arrangement. And Antony goes off to war, does not so well, wins a couple of battles, right, does okay, and comes back to Egypt, to Alexandria, and he has what they call a triumph. Now the Romans celebrated triumphs. When you won, you went out, and you beat up people, you brought back captives, you brought back the booty, and you sort of paraded it. So he has a triumph, and it's called the Armenian triumph because they beat Armenia. But at this triumph, Cleopatra is on a platform dressed as Isis, and the children are there dressed regally. And in public, Antony gives certain things away. What does he give? Just the things he promised. Caesarion is called King of Kings and given the rulership of Egypt. Alexander Helios is given Armenia and Pontia. That's like near Turkey. Cleopatra Selene, she gets Libya. Little Ptolemy, he gets Phoenicia and northern Syria. This is their endowment. These kids don't have to worry about college. They are well set up. Cleopatra has pulled it off. She's doing quite well. Now, Rome is infuriated. Rome feels that Antony, a Roman, has celebrated a triumph in Egypt and given away what should be Rome to Egyptian kids. They are furious, and war is declared. They declare war, but not on Antony. He's Roman. They declare war on Cleopatra. She is the enemy of Rome. So there's going to be a battle. The big battle will be fought on the water at Actium. It will be Cleopatra, who is in the middle. She has her own ship in the Battle of Actium. She's not going to let Antony go on his own. She's going to watch him against the Roman fleet. And they're defeated. They are defeated. They have to flee. Antony and Cleopatra flee back to Alexandria. Octavian marches on Alexandria, says, "Give me Antony to Cleopatra, and I won't sack the city." Cleopatra refuses. She won't give up Antony. She is a person who has principles. She is planning on suicide. She's going to kill herself. Sends a message to Antony. She barricades herself in the palace, sends a message to Antony and says, "By the time you get this, I'll be dead." Antony reads it and decides to kill himself. He takes his sword, runs himself through, doesn't die immediately. When Cleopatra hears what he's done, she has him brought to the palace, and he dies in her arms. Octavian captures Cleopatra, and he intends to bring her back to Rome for his triumph, and she's going to be paraded in chains. But she outsmarts him. She outsmarts him. She has a snake smuggled into her in a basket of figs. And this is the famous scene where she dies by the bite of a cobra, which is the traditional protector of Egypt. And she dies, and Octavian is cheated of having Cleopatra in Rome in chains. This is the end of Egypt as a nation. Cleopatra tried to bring it back, tries to resurrect the religion, learns the language. A valiant attempt, but fails. Egypt will no longer be a nation. It'll be a province of Rome. Now, the thing I would like you to remember from this course is not the pyramids and the temples and the tombs, which are sterile and personalityless. Remember that the reason Egypt was great was not because just the Nile and the gift of the Nile, as Herodotus said. It's because of people like Narmer, who unified it. Sneferu, who taught Egypt how to build the pyramids. The Nubians, who tried to unify it and bring it back. And Cleopatra, who tried so valiantly to resurrect Egypt. Thank you.